Well, welcome back, folks. Today we're going to review some of the parts I've purchased for the CT70 Mini Trail Honda. I just got them earlier today, so I do a quick review of those here and share with you a little bit of a change to this project from what I had originally discussed in the previous video. I'm not going to do quite as extensive a reconditioning at this point anyway that we talked about. I'm still going to do quite a bit of the work, as previously discussed, replace the tire, inner tubes, got the new shell for the headlight, etc. And we'll review that in a little more detail here in a moment. But the one probably major thing I'm not going to do initially here is replace the exhaust system. It's very pricey to do, and I have another project that I've recently acquired that I'm going to, once I complete installing these components, I'm going to move on to before I spend any more serious money on the CT70. Now, my intention is eventually to do so, but not just at this time. We'll come back to the exhaust system, and I literally will have to replace the whole exhaust system, including the guards. So we'll do that at a later time, but right now we're going to focus on getting these items installed to freshen up the bike a little bit. So let's talk about them in a little bit more detail. The headlight shell, which was severely damaged, we've talked about that before. This is a reproduction part, as you can see here, and I think you can see it's made in Taiwan. So it's not original OEM Honda. I did compare the paint color to the original bike, and it's not bad. I was concerned, of course, that it's going to because it's so bright and fresh and new, it's going to be very conspicuous, and it probably will still be a bit of a standout compared to the current shell and the current paint job on the bike, but it looks better than what I thought it probably was going to originally. So we've got the new headlight shell. Over there in the corner, in the upper right corner, we have the coil, high tension lead coil splicing kit. Now this kit's made by NGK, and it's designed to replace the high tension coil lead coming from the coil body to the spark plug in case the original is damaged. The coil does work on the bike, but the coil high tension wire is quite severely damaged, and someone over the years has wrapped it with a couple of iterations, I think, of duct tape. So this kit made by NGK is designed to splice, and you can see the part of that splices the two cables together. You clip off the old high tension lead and you splice on this new one, and it does in fact come with a new spark plug cap, which this bike needs because it has looks like an older style lawnmower cap on it. Someone put on somewhere in the past. This is a very nice kit, by the way. I have used this on previous projects. Last time I used it, I think, was on a CT70 that I repaired for a friend of mine quite a number of years ago. He had the same problem with his high tension coil wire, and I used one of these to repair it. The only challenge with installing this kit is the coil on the CT70 is tucked up inside the frame, so you literally have to drop the engine out from the bottom in order to get at the coil and to repair the wire. So it's a little bit of effort compared to, of course, a lot of other bikes, but that's just the way it is. Two new inner tubes, and these are the offset or the 90-degree style valve right here. The bike currently has the straight valve type that would stick out, protrude something like that, and they're hard to get because of the shape and nature of the wheels. They're hard to get a chuck on, and I believe this was the original style that Honda used back in the day. At least that's my supposition. I'm not sure, but I think so. Anyway, these are a lot easier to use than the straight type that you would normally see on a standard wheeled motorcycle. So when I went to order these, I wanted to make sure I got the 90-degree bend. In this area, we've got some miscellaneous hardware items. A cap nut that goes on the air cleaner screw that goes through the air cleaner body and holds the air cleaner assembly together. The original was missing. The clamp that holds the boot, the rubber boot coming from the air cleaner to the carburetor throat was missing, so just bought a new one of those. You notice almost all of these parts are OEM Honda. One of those half-moon shells that goes up into and clamps the exhaust pipe up into the cylinder head. One of them, believe it or not, was missing. So I just ordered another one of those. And then these two items are those plugs that go on the right side of the body and plug those threaded fittings that are used in some markets to attach the handhold or hand grip that I don't believe, as I shared earlier, it was used in North American models. So that's what those plugs are for. And a new taillight lens. Again, this is OEM Honda. And the reason I ordered a new lens, even though it did have a lens on it, the original right here, someone in the past, you can see what they did there. I don't know what happened with the screws, but the original screws, but it looks like they tried to make their own and they welded them up, believe it or not. In order for those screws to go through the holes, what they did is they opened them up and enlarged them, as you can see there, so that the weld would go pass through. Well, that's not going to work for me at all. So this is relatively inexpensive. It is OEM Honda. It is made by Stanley. In fact, the nomenclature on the new one is identical to the nomenclature on the old one, and they are identical in all of the respects. And I also got a couple of new screws to mount that new taillight lens to the taillight assembly. So that's the parts we're going to install now or next. I think what I'm going to do is begin by installing new inner tubes. Obviously I got to pull the wheels off to do that. I'm not necessarily intending to show every step of everything that I'm going to do, but I will attempt to capture for posterity here in video from time to time the various things that I'm working on and give you a flavor of what I'm up to. But again, it's not going to be a complete how-to install all of these parts. So let's go ahead and we'll get over to the bike and I'll get started on a few things, and like I said, I'll bring you back as I think it's appropriate and share some of the process with you. One of the things I failed to mention a moment ago as I was getting myself organized here to move over to the project and start working on it, is I failed to mention I have bought a new battery for the project. And here is the new battery right here. I just activated it this morning, added the acid to it, and then charged it for about 3 or 4 hours. So this battery is good to go. Here is the battery I pulled out of it. And you can see this is actually my writing from May of 2007. So it's 14 years that battery's been in the bike. In fact, I'm 99.9% sure this is the battery I put in it when I initially worked on it for the previous owner to initially get it running. That was before he sold it to me, which was probably 2 years after that or so. And certainly we've got our life out of that battery. Again, 14 years. It's not any good. It doesn't hold a charge. I did try to poke it with a battery charger and nothing. I didn't really expect I was going to get anything out of it. It's time to recycle this battery, and then we're going to go ahead and, as part of this reconditioning, we're going to install this new battery. We're going to begin with changing the inner tubes in both front and rear tires. I'm going to start with the front wheel and front tire. See, I've got everything pretty much prepped. I pushed the bike back out of the front wheel clamp. We got it lashed in the rear with a couple of tie downs, and then you can see I've got the jack underneath the engine there to be able to lift that front end up so I can free the front wheel. Right now there is still weight on that front wheel because I want to undo the nut on the end of the axle with the weight on the bike or on the wheel, so that front wheel doesn't want to do this on me when I'm working on it. I got to pull the cotter pin or the split pin, back that nut off, drive the axle out, and of course disconnect the speedometer drive and the front brake cable. Both are very elementary, very straightforward. So I'm going to begin by disconnecting the cables, and then we'll go ahead and pull the axle, and then that front wheel should be ready to slide out after I lift the weight up off of the front forks. One thing I did want to note is I believe this axle was previously installed from the wrong side. To my knowledge, I've never had this front wheel off, but I'm pretty confident the front tubes have been replaced, or both inner tubes have been replaced at one time. But I believe, based on looking at the parts diagrams and everything I can determine on the photos on the internet, is this axle is supposed to go through from the left. This is the left side of the bike, from the left to the right like this. So this nut should be on the opposite side. Not a big deal in most cases, and in fact it's a pretty common mistake that people make when they take these things apart back in the day. I run into it all the time, but I do believe this is installed incorrectly. So when I put it back together, I will put it back in proper orientation. That is, pass the axle through from the left to the right with the nut on the opposite side. That cotter pin or split pin has seen better days. I will obviously replace that out of my inventory. I do keep metric split pins, cotter pins around. Now we're going to have to lock the axle on the opposite side. There's a hole through it, and then spin this nut off. I'm just going to use one of my screwdrivers. I will not be putting a lot of tension on this, so I'm not concerned about the bending of the shaft. You do have to be careful about that, though. You don't want to bend and damage your good tools. That's a 19mm nut on there, and it is none too tight. Washer and nut. And now the axle actually is free to turn, of course. You can see that there. So now I'm going to lift the front of the bike up, and we'll see if we can't get that axle out. Note the brass hammer. I think I'm going to have to use a drift on the end there to drive that through. See the brass drift? You keep a set of these around. These are not expensive, but they work pretty well. There's the bushing and the axle. I'll clean this up a little bit on my wire wheel. And then of course everything get re-greased as it goes back together. But there's the wheels. We're over at the workbench now. I just set the wheel up here and kind of clean some of the grease off my hands. You know, anytime you work with wheels, your hands always get filthy dirty. It's one of the reasons they're not my favorite thing to do. But I haven't taken it apart yet, so we're going to go ahead and just slide this brake backer plate out. And there's the drive for the speedometer. And though it's a little dirty inside, I don't see anything in particular that catches my attention. It's got plenty of grease for the speedometer gear drive here. So I think what I'll probably do is just clean it up really well with brake cleaner, re-grease it in here, the drive. The seal looks intact. There's a seal right here. I don't know if you can see that or not. But I think it's operationally it's fine. So I'm not going to do a lot with that outside of cleaning it. And then we'll reassemble it. Same thing with the hub here. See, it's a little dirty, so I'll clean that all out. Here's the bearing. It's a sealed bearing, I notice. And just clean it up really well. Now these wheels are a split wheel. The rim is a two-parter. It's a clamshell. To be honest with you, never had one of these apart. In fact, I've not really worked on a lot of Honda mini trails. I've worked on a couple over the years for friends and acquaintances, primarily get them running. or they had a particular problem in carburation or something, but I've really never got into this level of work on a mini trail. But I do know these wheels are bolted together, and you can see the bolts and the nuts right here. There's 4 of them that hold this wheel together like that. I don't think you've got to take the wheel apart to get the tire off. At least that's my hope. And here's the opposite side. You can see the seal right here. Again, I'll clean this up a little bit. I'm not going to paint the wheels. We're going to begin by taking the valve stem core out, Schrader valve, letting the air out of the tire, see if we can break this bead. And what I want to do is get one side of the tire off the rim, and then I can probably just fish the inner tube out. It's a little homemade valve core remover. I know you can buy these, but I made this up years ago. It's an old valve stem with a metal core remover. You can see the slot there, and I just Loctited these together, and it works really good. Well, there's going to be a change of plans. After examining this rim and the stiffness of this tire, this rim is made up of fairly lightweight metal. It's a stamping, and I'm concerned that if I try to get in here with my tire irons and bend this tire bead up over this rim like you normally would do, I'm going to distort this rim. So as an alternative, I'm going to go ahead and split the rim. And that is, I'm going to take these fasteners apart and lift this apart, and therefore I can just get at the inner tube. Never done this before. There's probably people watching this video that have been through this many times and know what they're doing, certainly more than what I probably do at this point. But that to me seems like the least destructive method, and probably frankly the easiest, rather than forcing a stiff tire bead off over this rim and meantime trying not to damage the rim itself. So there's the one rim. Get these nuts out of the way. There's the one half. See right there. Make it easy to clean it too. There's the other, and you can see the inner tube will come right out of the inside of that rim. Like that. This might in fact be the original inner tube, because it's got the Nitto name and logo on it right there. So it's possible it's the original. I don't know for sure. I know they don't hold air very well anymore, especially the rear goes soft really quickly, so they're due to be replaced. So I'm going to go ahead and get some of these pieces cleaned up, and then we're going to go ahead and put this all back together. A couple hours later, and I've got everything prepped and ready to go back together. You can see the brake shoe backing plate. This has all been cleaned. Everything internal has been taken out, cleaned, and re-greased, including that, of course, that drive gear right there for the speedometer. Fresh grease in there. I removed all the old grease. The shoes I removed. I cleaned them, I scuffed them, and then I reversed them to equal out the wear, even out the wear. I suspect these are the original shoes, and one of them is a little bit more wore than the other one, so I just flipped them and reversed them to even that wear pattern out. I think there's plenty of meat on the shoes, but I just wanted to, while I had it apart, I thought I'd make that little extra change. I've mentioned before, I don't like working with old brake shoes of this vintage because I don't know if they have asbestos in them. I suspect they do. So I'm very careful when I work with the shoes themselves. I wear nitrile gloves. I work in good ventilation. Asbestos particles are nothing to mess around with, especially if you're going to be breathing them or airborne. So I'm very careful when I work with older shoes. I think the modern brake shoes you don't have to be concerned about. And of course, both sides of this has been cleaned and everything put back together. The hub, the inner hub has been, I scuff sanded it, cleaned it of course, scuff sanded it, washed it out with carburetor cleaner, or brake cleaner rather. This bearing, it seems to be just fine, so I don't think I have to do anything with that. That's a sealed bearing anyway. So this is nice and clean and is ready to go. And I also worked around the rim here a little bit because there's some surface rust starting to show up in a couple of places. So I scuffed the rust off of this rim as well as the companion rim that is currently holding the tire. I also have now mounted, get this in frame for you, I have mounted the inner tube, as you can see, and as I indicated a moment ago, I did scuff this inside rim here where there was some light surface rusting, and I've carefully tucked the tube in place. So we'll go ahead now and be able to bolt this rim set back together. So it's pretty academic now at this point. You know, the brake vacuum plate will go in last when I go to put the assembly on the bike. What I'm going to do next is put the two halves of the wheel back together and reattach them with the bolts. Again, I'm not going to show every piece of that because it's you know, kind of redundant, but I will give you a flavor of it as we go. I've got the rim back together. You will notice I use my socket and my wrench to double check the tightness of all the bolts. The reason being is I don't over tighten with my impact driver. This tool has a lot of torque and a lot of power. So I intentionally don't over tighten them with this tool because it would be real easy to snap one of those bolts off. So my intention with the Makita is just to snug them up tight, and then I go around and check them all with my socket just to make sure they're good and snug, and there's nothing that was too loose. So now this is pretty much ready to go except for pumping up the tube. So I've got to put the valve back in it. I'll pump it up, take the valve out, let it compress. I'll do that 2 or 3 times to try to get that inner tube to settle in, put the valve back in for the last time, and then it's pretty much ready to go back on the bike. I've inflated and deflated the tire 3 times to allow that tube to settle into place, and I did the final inflation to 17 psi pounds per square inch, which is a Honda recommended pressure for the front wheel. And I have also installed the brake backing plate, as you can see here. So this assembly now is ready to be reinstalled in the front and forks. So as you can see, I got everything aligned and about ready to go back together. The axle right there, I just got started. I obviously haven't pushed it through yet, but I have got everything on it in position. So now it's a matter of pushing the axle through and then putting the washer and the nut on the opposite side along with the cotter pin. Split pin, you can see the new one I have laying there. It is a metric split pin. I keep a supply of those around, so that way I don't have to always buy NOS or new from the manufacturer. So that less expensive that way. And I have assorted sizes, so I can always almost always match them up. So let me reposition myself a little bit, and I'm going to use the brass mallet, and I'm going to drive that axle through. I'm going to put a little NACs on there and threads and spin on my nut. Again, I'm running this the opposite direction as I originally found it, which was from this way. I have my torque wrench preset. It's a 19 millimeter socket. I have this preset to 20 foot-pounds. The factory torque on this is supposed to be 29, but since I'm using anti-seize, I'm going to back off a little bit. One other thing, I'll take this off and then I want to share with you. Should have showed this before I put that nut on. The hole for the cotter pin, or the split pin, is running vertically. And I want to set that before I start putting everything together because I want that pin to run vertical. I don't want it to run horizontal. It's just my preference. So you got to set that really ahead of time because once you start tightening this assembly down, you'll find it will be very difficult to turn that axle. And of course, one of these slots then needs to align vertically with the hole in the axle for the cotter pin. So you'll have to finesse it probably a little bit accordingly. Let's see if I can get this screwdriver in here to hold the axle while I go ahead and torque this. Okay, that's 20, and I can see that already that my slot does not line up with the hole in the axle for the cotter pin, the split pin. So what I need to do is I'm just going to take this socket and I'm going to snug it up manually. So I'm going to go up in torque until I get alignment with my hole in my axle. I'm real close right there. I think that's on. Now it's just a matter of dropping that split pin through and we'll bend it over. Now the way I was taught when I had a couple of years of automotive technical school, which I had many years ago in high school, you don't bend the cotter pin or the split pin this way, you bend it up over the end of the axle. In this case it's an axle. So you go like this, and then on the bottom you bend it up against the nut. And if it's a little too long, which it actually is on that back side, I'm going to snip that off with a cutter, and I'm going to flatten that bottom leg up against the bottom of the nut, and I'll probably clip this one off as well and just pin it over. There. So it's flattened up against the back side of the nut and it's pinned over, as you can see here. That's the way I was taught to install split pins or cotter pins on a castellated nut such as this. So that assembly is complete. We're going to go back to the other side and we'll install the cables. We're going to start with the speedometer cable. The thing you got to remember with a speedo is that split in the end of that cable right there, you probably see that, aligns and is keyed into a drive pin on the inside of that shaft. So there's a shaft that's inside of here that fits over that's driven by that gear, and you just want to make sure those are aligned correctly. And I normally only snug this nut here, right here, up by hand. I don't usually put a tool on it like pliers. For one thing, I don't find it's necessary, and number two, it'll mar it up unnecessarily, I think. So I usually just go finger tight. And then the brake cable, pretty straightforward. So I think we've got everything back together. I might have to finesse the brake adjustment once we get the bike running. Take it out and ride it a bit. Now I'm going to lower the bike down off the jack, put it back in the wheel block at the front, and then this front wheel will be complete. So I got the bike back in the tire block here at the front, got it lowered down. This stage of the front tire is complete. All told, actual hands-on time, I probably could have done this, especially if I wasn't recording the video. I had a little dwell time in there. I was waiting for some parts to dry. A couple hours, probably pretty easily. You can have this done. It took me longer than that just because of some of the things I just talked about. Next thing we're going to do is move to the rear wheel, and we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to pull the rear tire off and put a new tube in it. I don't think I'm going to show that because for all practical purposes, it's a duplication of what you've just seen. Outside of having to take the chain off, break the chain, and get the chain off the sprocket, it's a very similar, in fact, it's virtually identical when it comes to changing the tube itself. So I'm not going to record that. We'll come back a little bit later as I'm moving on to some other work that I'm going to do on the bike. Meantime, we're going to call this video a wrap at this point, folks. Any issues, questions, thoughts, drop me a note. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching.